if you think of an electric guitar, or if someone had to draw an electric guitar, they'd probably draw something like this. This would be the shape they see as what an electric guitar looks like. And I think, you know, its impact has been absolutely phenomenal. You just got to look at the way it's been used right across the board, from our kind of music through Jimi Hendrix, to the blues players, to heavier guys like Ritchie Blackmore, Yngwie Malmsteen, you know, right across the board. Its versatility is tremendous as an instrument, depending on the amplifiers you put it with. It is just the guitar. And will anyone ever make a better looking instrument than that? Everything is so right on it, isn't it?
This guitar, I think it's fair to say, with Hank playing it, because it was Hank's guitar, I think Hank Marvin created the group boom that we're still in today, because the Shadows Apache changed the world, I think, for a lot of people. Certainly did for us. But the group boom came from the Cliff in the Shadows situation. And if Cliff hadn't bought this and imported it, who knows where we'd be now.
And those sounds were, to me, something quite wonderful that I wanted to try to emulate. And I then set about trying to work out how to emulate the sound. And at first I just didn't have a clue, because later on we found that some of those guys, like James Burton, were using lighter gauge strings for a start, which we didn't know about then. And also they had access in the studios to tape echo and things like this, which obviously in the back streets of Newcastle there wasn't a lot of tape echo. So they were some of the drawbacks I initially found. And of course the guitar I was using, which was basically an acoustic guitar with a pickup stuck on it, was no way going to sound like a proper electric guitar.
So what about that first electric guitar then, when you changed from the Hofner? Do you remember what that was?
Well, I borrowed one for a while. Here we go again, borrowing. Was an old Vega. This must have been quite an old guitar, because the pickup arrangement on it was had one pickup near the bridge, and over the pickup it had like a big horseshoe arrangement, a chromed horseshoe. But it sounded terrific. It had that twangy sound that the American guitars had. And I used that on the first tour with Cliff, and for about the first 6 months. And then I bought an Abomination. It was made by Antoria, a Japanese company. And the reason I bought it was because it looked like a rock and roll guitar. It had a small, solid body. The headpiece here was, headstock was similar to a Fender, but much bigger and clumsier, with all the machine heads on one side. And I thought, wow, that looks something. So I think it cost me £35 and I was done. The neck was very chunky. The section through the back was very deep. It's the kind of guitar that Fred Flintstone may have come up with. And the neck was actually bent like a bow. It sort of came up, so if the viewer's looking here, it actually went like that and bowed up, which meant if you had a decent action about here, the top, this section was about ½ an inch. So I tried to avoid playing around this area on the neck, which wasn't easy. I used that for about, 6 months? And we did some of Cliff's records on that. It had a very unusual sort of, usual out-of-phase sort of sound, and the strings used to click against the pickups, which was quite interesting. Then we moved on to the Stratocaster period.
This guitar is a April '59 Stratocaster that Cliff ordered from Santa Ana, California. Cliff and the Shads were listening to people like Ricky Nelson, obviously Buddy Holly, Gene Vincent, and we loved Ricky's records, for instance, Ricky Nelson. And we didn't know in early 1959, who the guitar player was. I mean, it later transpired, everyone knows it's James Burton, but we didn't know their names then, because Ricky's records just said Ricky Nelson with instrumental accompaniment.
And we were looking for this sound. We wanted to get this twanging American sound, and it had to be an American guitar, we felt. Our heroes by then were Buddy Holly, and we decided the Fender was the way to go. Buddy Holly used one. Well, he was then dead, but had used one. James Burton. we got a brochure from the States, and we looked through this brochure, and it was kind of happy hours of browsing at all these instruments in there.
I remember Mark Knopfler saying that he can remember the smell of the brochure, never mind about anything else. And we're thumbing through the little brochure, and we came to the middle of the brochure, and this flamingo pink gold-plated maple neck Strat was in the centre. We said, Ricky Nelson's guitar player must play this one. It must be this one, you know. So Cliff ordered this one for Hank to play. I think it was about 140 guineas in sort of April '59. So he sent off for it because you couldn't buy American instruments in shops then. It's very difficult to imagine now with all the huge stores selling equipment and stuff. You just couldn't buy them, couldn't get it. And so this thing arrived about May of 1959. And this thing arrived, the case, and, you know, even the case looked fantastic, you know, the old tweed case. And we opened the case. And I've always sort of said it was like, you know, the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when the ship comes over with the lights, and we just went, oh, you know. I mean, it was obviously brand new then, gold-plated, beautiful maple neck. Of course, I had the wobble arm on it, you know, which I don't use. And we were just stunned by the look.
We were so stunned, we almost didn't want to touch it, just look at it, you know, frightened to sort of play it in case it disappeared or something. But it was quite an amazing instrument, and of course we later found out that James Burton didn't use a Stratocaster at all. He used a battered old Telecaster with light gauge string. But nevertheless, this was one of the sequences of accidents which led up to me developing a sound which became a readily identifiable sound. So getting this guitar, Stratocaster with a tremolo arm, was the first step, really.
As soon as Cliff became famous, we managed to get Vox AC-15s from Vox for nothing. So we were chuffed a bit, you know. And it was the combination of this Fender Stratocaster and the Vox amp that gave Hank his sound with his Miazzi Echo Box, the Italian Echo Box. And the AC-15 we used at the Palladium, things like that on Sunday night at the Palladium. But when we used to work live, of course there was no PAs in those days. We didn't have huge rigs or anything. We used whatever was in the theatre, just a couple of mics, and we had no mics on our amps. We just set the amp on the stage and just had an internal balance between the front line. You know, no PAs, no mics. And of course the girls just screamed the bloody place down, so we couldn't hear anything. You'd be a bit like the Beatles years later at Shea Stadium, where they couldn't hear what they were playing because of the screaming, you know. And to cut a long story short, we had these AC-15s for a while, and then Hank went to a lovely man called Dick Denny, who was at Vox. And sort of, I wasn't actually there, but he said something like, "Can you make me one of these amps, but with more volume?" And Dick put the two AC-15s together, which created the AC-30. And that amp, you know, the AC-30, Hank's playing and this guitar, started the whole thing off, really.
Well, we had the Vox amps at that time, the first AC-30s, and the Strat sounded really good through a Vox AC-30 because there's something about that Vox AC-30. It's got a kind of raw, middly sound, and it seemed to suit the Stratocaster. The Echo Box came along a little later. We were invited by Jack Good, that some of the viewers might remember, who produced the Oboe Show, and he went on to big things in America, but at that time he was producing the successor to the Oboe Show. I think it was Boy Meets Girl, and he did that in Manchester. Cliff and ourselves were appearing for a week in Liverpool, and we had a call from Jack that he'd like us to come across to Manchester and meet a hero of ours who was Gene Vincent, who'd just come over to do some work in Britain. So we shot over one day and we met Gene, and that was a thrill for us. But Joe Brown, who was a resident on the show, took me on one side and said, "I'd like to show you something. What do you think of this?" And he gave me his guitar, and he had this little green and brown or green and beige box on his amplifier with a few knobs on the front, and I played the guitar through it, and there's all these amazing echo sounds came out. I thought, that's fantastic. It's like being in a recording studio. And he didn't like it. Joe liked the very dry sound, and I've always said to Joe that his guitar sounds like a plank of wood. You know, it's got no sustain, donk, donk, and we have a bit of a laugh over that sometimes. But I liked this sound because I could see the possibility of it, to get a recorded guitar sound live on stage. So when I got back to London, I contacted Jennings, who are then the importers, and they kindly allowed me to have one, to try one, and I thought it was absolutely tremendous. So immediately that became part of the sound. So the guitar with the tremolo arm, so I developed a technique whereby it's quite popular now with light gauge strings for people to do finger vibratos, you know, when they're playing. But then we had very heavy gauge strings on it, and it was impossible to do that, really. Not that anyone had thought of it anyway in Britain, and we hadn't heard anyone play like that. But I didn't like the sound of a guitar when a note just rings like this. It seems to me uninteresting. You know, a human voice usually has a vibrato. Most natural things seem to have vibratos, and other instruments, trumpets, violins. And I found with this tremolo, if I held it in my hand when I was playing, I could, you know, get some kind of expression. So that was a technique I developed, and this tremolo arm, the guitar, the amplifier, and the echo box, over a period of only, I guess, probably 3 months or so, 2 to 3 months, that sound had arrived that I wasn't particularly, I couldn't take any credit for it, in the sense that it wasn't something like a grand plan. It was a series of accidents. Put them all together, and we had a sound that people were now talking about. And I didn't think too much of it at the time, you know, because to me it was just the way it sounded. I was trying to sound like Scotty Moore and Cliff Gallup, you know. I wasn't trying to get this new sound going. But I think the heavy strings, the tremolo arm, of course, and I guess just the way I played the guitar, failing in a way to sound like those guys, ended up with a distinctive style, which was terrific. I'll be eternally grateful.
But it's special because of its history, you know. It's history. It's just what it did and what records it's been on. And I think, you know, when you read about Hendrix's guitars going for astronomical money, and Jimmy didn't, see, people like Jimmy or Mark Knopfler, they never had one special guitar. They, you know, you go and see Jimmy or Mark, they've got 28 guitars on the side of the stage, you know. So the ones that went for huge money, like Hendrix's, the one from Woodstock, because people have seen him playing it at Woodstock. But this was like you know, this was loved, this was cherished, it was, and still is. And I guess it's worth a few quid.
But apart from the thrill of going to America, one of the greatest thrills for us was actually to get down into Texas and play a concert in the hometown of Buddy Holly, which is Lubbock. And there we met his father and some guys who had sung on the early Crickets records on the backing vocals. And that was a real thrill to be there in the place and meet his father and hear a few little words mentioned about the early records, how they were made and so forth. So that was quite a thrill, because Buddy was a big hero of ours, and he just had something about his music which I think the fact it's lived on and so many people are still influenced by it shows how simple it was, but tremendously effective. And of course it was nice for someone like me who wore glasses to see that someone who wore glasses could actually become famous. Because it's quite an amusing story. Back in 1959, early 1959 in fact, Cliff and ourselves did a week at the Finsbury Park Empire. And on the show was a guy called Johnny Duncan, American country and western singer who had a big skiffle hit at the time. And his guitarist, he said, "Look, Hank," he said, "can I give you a tip to help you?" I said, "Sure, you know, you're a very experienced musician, great." He said, "It's about your glasses." He said, "Do yourself a favor and don't wear your glasses on stage." He said, "You don't do that in show business. You don't wear glasses on stage." He said, "Look at our drummer, Lenny Hastings." He said, he wears, he's blind as a bat. He said, he doesn't wear them on stage. I said, "But I've got to." I said, I would just fall off the stage or something. He says, it doesn't matter. Fall off the stage, but don't wear your glasses. I'm glad I didn't listen to him, because it became a kind of trademark, his appearance, which is good, you know. And it gave a lot of hope to other kids with pimples and glasses.